Welcome, everybody. Happy to see you here. I'm going to talk about my personal experiences and the lessons I learned spending the last, 15 months working from home and with people in different time zones than myself. I'm going to provide you a little bit of context around the job I did for the client and sort of the setup there. And then I've got 4 small stories that I want to tell you and some lessons learned based on each of those. So this is the first time giving this talk, so I'm not really that sure about the timing. I'll try to keep an eye on the clock, and then I hope it suits with all the 4 stories, but we'll see. I'm sure we'll have fun anyway. So I do want to preface this with saying that working remotely is pretty great. I think it's kind of hyped a little bit in our industry right now, and maybe a bit more than I think it deserves, but there's also some truth to it, that it is extremely flexible, which means that there's some extra time for like family and friends. There's no commute. Hey, that's really nice. I'm not spending that hour going there and then an hour going home in the afternoon. So that's 2 hours a day to spend with the kids instead. The coffee is really good at my house compared to most offices. Surprise, well, because I like that. And if you like tea or you like something else, you can have really good. Put in your favorite thing. That's nice. There's things like there tends to be very little fluff. So again, surprise, surprise, there's no dress code in my home office because, hey, there's me. So I can wear just whatever comfortable I want to, or I can wear a tie if I want to. I probably don't, but I could. You tend not to have as many meetings working remotely because it's just not kind of the default way to do everything. So that gives you some ability to focus. You're not in an open office space where you can hear everybody else, right? So whatever makes focus work for you, you can go outside, or you can listen to really loud music, or you can have it completely quiet. That's all personal things. That's up to you. You don't bother anybody else either way. So these are all really good things. And from the company's side, and I guess as well from us as employees' side, that's the fact that everyone can play, in the sense that we're not tied to geography. So you don't have to be in the same town to work with each other, right? That doesn't really make a difference. So you get a broader pool of people to draw from. So these are all really good things, and these are all really true. But, and then that's whatever comes after that, but. And that's what most of the talk is about. But that doesn't mean that I don't agree with these things. It's just that there are also some things that at least going into this assignment with working from home sort of naively overlooked. So I'm going to share what I was naive about, and then hopefully you can be slightly less naive about that if you go into the same kind of situation. So a little bit of context around where these experiences come from. So I was hired. I'm a freelance independent consultant, contractor, whatever you want to call it. And I was hired by a company who wanted to do a transition from a great big, old, nice, hard to penetrate monolith. Not so nice, really. But anyway, monolith, like many of those are. It's not as it wasn't actually as old as many of those maybe are, but this was built really, really quickly. And from a business perspective, that was the right thing to do for that company, but then that also kind of meant that they pretty quickly came to a situation where now they really needed to do something to their architecture. And some of the guys read my book on microservices and sort of decided, hey, we'll hire Christian because that's what we want. So they called me up. Christian, can you please come and sort of do some microservices and tell us how to do that, and then send it on our way? Sounds good. Yeah, we'll do that. So that's the context. That was my job, really, there. So that means I had a few different roles. I was and am, well, it's kind of, I have a couple of weeks left, so I'm handing everything over, so I'm starting to talk in the past tense, even though I am still working for them. So let's say I was their architect for their microservices architecture, where they were moving to. I was also one of the developers. So we needed hands-on. We needed to actually do this, not just drawings and principles and waving our hands. We needed to build some microservices. And I was a coach, because the idea wasn't for me to stick around forever. It was something like, it has been a year, maybe a bit more, and then send them on the way, and then they should be able to carry this forward. So that was what I was hired to do for them. It turns out that change agent is maybe a better description of what I actually ended up doing there. Because there's no doubt that there was buy-in for the overall direction that I wanted to go in, but there's just a lot of things that come along with that maybe, well, I knew, but maybe I hadn't made explicit enough for them, so there were some surprises along the way. And that plays into my experiences, really, that a lot of what I did was trying to make them change the way they worked and the way they thought about things and the way they approached quality, for instance. So another way to look at my role was that I served on the architecture board. I was a developer and worked closely with their developers. So this was sort of the upfront. These two were the constituencies. I can't say that. The groups of people that I was supposed to work with, and I did. I worked a lot with the developers, but I also worked a lot with their ops people. Because turns out a monolith and microservices aren't the same thing in a production environment. Who knew? I learned a lot. I worked a lot with the people they had that sort of set up their tooling around a bunch of things. I'll return to some of that. I worked with the DBAs. I worked with their quality assurance people, and I actually did also serve on that architecture board. But I put that last because that was maybe the main focus sort of upfront, talking about the role. But in reality, that was 1 hour a week, and then the rest of the time was all of these. And I guess that's also the right thing to do, actually focus on building the things and not just talking about building them. This is also an illustration of the situation. So this is me in Denmark. And yeah, so I took this screenshot the other day, and it was 11:15 in the morning, my time. So I'm kind of a morning person. That's actually really prime working time for me. That's probably from 8 to 12 is where I really function best. So that's a really good time for me. But you see sort of the gray shadow here. That's where the sun is at this point in time. So in this area, it's day. But over here, all my colleagues except for one were all over here. This was a US-based company that I was hired for. So the nearest ones were 6 time zones away from me. Some were 7, and some were 9 time zones away from me. And that kind of makes a difference. I have an overlap. If everybody works quote unquote normal hours, I have a few hours overlap with the people who are 6 hours away. But I don't have an overlap with the people 9 hours away, actually, which is challenging. So let's go into the stories. The first one I have titled, It's a Cultural Shift. So before starting on all of this, there was this idea floated from the client, a good idea, that the model for why involvement would be 5 + 5 + 5. The idea being, Christian, could you please come in, build 5 microservices for us? Then identify the next 5 and work closely with our developers on building those. Identify the next 5, then take your hands away from the keyboard and only coach our developers, and then they have a template of 15 nice microservices, and 5 of them they had built all the code for, so they'd be ready to go. This was the initial picture of what this was going to be. Now, they already had this. They already had a successful product in production. So it's not greenfield. It's not something you can just go in and build something along the side. So from the start, I was like, the first 10, I don't want to build 5 by myself, because that's kind of a weird silo to be in an existing system. I think we should start working together from the very beginning. So that was kind of the first thing that I wanted to modify around their idea about what my role was going to be. Then, so we accepted that, and that was good. So I started working closely with the developers from the get-go. Then, yeah, I started on the task, and pretty soon I found myself sort of jotting things down on my little yellow sticky notes in my home office, and it was things like this. It was like, okay, I think we probably need to do more code reviews than we're already doing. I think we should use pull requests. I think we should deploy much more frequently than it looks like we're doing. We should have metrics so we have insights into production. We should automate all the things, really. Automate. So this is where it's beginning to look like, well, there is the task of introducing some microservices, but that pulls a whole bunch of other things along with it in order to make those microservices successful. So I'm kind of jotting these things down, and okay, that's fine, we'll do this. And these are all things that I've done with other clients as well, and it's fine, and you can hear other talks about how this relates to microservices. These aren't, it's not unusual. We have to go through these kinds of things. I guess actually a lot of the things that I have here were also in the keynote yesterday afternoon with the surviving microservices. I could kind of relate to that. Yeah, we kind of had to do all of those things that she was talking about yesterday, Michelle. So, but these all change quite a lot about how you work day to day. So if you're not really doing code reviews, that's a new thing to do. If you're not used to building automation, and then all of a sudden as a developer, that's something that you also do. That's something new on your plate. If you're not used to setting up those dashboards that makes the metrics in production visible, and if you're as a developer not looking at those because it's somebody else carrying the pager, then that's something new, right? So turns out there's a people problem here, or people. I don't actually like the word problem here, but that's just usually how you say it, right? It's a people problem. It's just the people aren't the problem, but maybe minds have to be changed. So there was a team of people. It wasn't just me, so I couldn't just agree with myself. This was the point after a few weeks of working for this company that I kind of came to terms with the fact that, yeah, they'd hired me as an architect and developer, but my biggest role was going to be change agent. So I wanted to communicate that to the boss. I wanted to adjust the expectations. So, because I was beginning to see that he was buying one thing, but I was beginning to think that I needed to deliver another thing. So we needed to adjust that a little bit. So I spent some time sort of writing my thoughts down on this, and that became a wall of text, and I thought, okay, I made good points in there, and this is good. So I sent that along in a chat message to him, and maybe it should have been an email because it was probably a bit long for chat, but that, well, whatever, it was text, and there was quite some of it. And so I sent that during my daytime, when the light was at my end of the earth and it was dark where he was. So a few hours passed, and he got up in the morning and he got to work and he read this, and then I got an okay back, and that was in my evening. And I think something that played in here was that at that time, that was my evening, so I wasn't probably in work mode. I wasn't that focused on work because it was probably right after dinner and putting the kids to bed and everything, and I was exhausted and pulled the phone out and, okay, he says, okay, fine, we're now adjusted because he said some thumbs up or whatever to that. Now we're on the same page, he's accepted that. And then sort of, he did nothing. And I put that in air quotes because it's not like he didn't do his job and he was involved in this task. But I was, apart from adjusting his expectations here, I was actually also asking him for some backup in saying, this is not purely a technical task. I sort of wanted him to also say, you guys are going to have to change the way that you're working, because I wanted his backup, because I was a new guy coming from outside with a lot of new ideas, which is fine, but it just works better if there's a little bit of push from management as well sometimes. But that didn't really happen until a few months later. So, and I was surprised when then something happened, which is kind of a failure on my part, and that's going to be the theme here. I fail, and then we try to learn something from that. So what made something happen was that I'd put some slides together in sort of another context. I wasn't really thinking. It was still about the way of working, but those slides weren't really put together to say this is about a cultural change. Those slides were just illustrating some points, and I borrowed some of the drawings from these Spotify engineering culture things, not because we wanted to copy what Spotify did, but it's a good starting point, and there's some discussion points we could have based on that. And that really made a difference for this boss. And I think I came to realize that the reason that it did is because he's a visual person. So this communicated much better to him than the wall of text that I'd originally sent him. So a lesson learned is that we communicate differently, and these styles really matter. And I'm pretty textual. I still actually read books. I don't really like watching videos that much, so they're recording me right now, that's fine. I don't watch that many of those videos. I like going to talks and actually being there. I'm also auditory, but I'm not that visual really. But I do like text, which means that for me it's easy to sort of default to craft the text and think about the words that I'm putting in there, and then expect that to be read in the same way as it was written. But that's not necessarily how everybody works, and that's not a failing on his part, that's a failing on my part about not thinking about who's receiving the message from me. So that's important. Think about who you're quote-unquote talking to. Now, this relates to the situation of working from home because the defaults change compared to what we're probably used to in most office settings. So in a typical office setting, we would, I guess lots of people are in like open office spaces, and it could be a room this size. So the default would be go on and say, hello, do you have 5 minutes, and blah, blah, we'll talk, and da, 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 da. And I'll get a lot of feedback from that. I will be pretty certain whether you actually heard what I said or not, or whether you were preoccupied with something else or not. But the default when working from home becomes chat quite easily. So we were using Slack in this instance, but I'm sure it's the same if you use Teams or some other means of chat. So that's textual. So the default changes, and that changes the dynamic of who communicates well and who receives those communications well. The other thing that changes compared to the situation where I go disturb you again and we talk is that that's a synchronous interaction. I get the feedback immediately. You can ask questions. In this case, because we had the time zone difference, it's async. I guess chat is also always kind of async, but especially with the time zone, it's very async. So there's a difference there as well. You don't get the quick feedback, which I mean, we're equipped for quick feedback. That's really easy for us to learn based on quick feedback, but slow feedback we're actually not very good at as human beings. We have to be quite conscious about picking up slow feedback. So we have to make that very explicit to ourselves. And in this case, I didn't, because I pulled out the phone, my mind was somewhere else. He says, okay, that's fine. And that's like, no, stop yourself. You sent him this much text. If he answers like this, you need to ask some questions. You need to probe him. What do you think about this part? You need to sort of start a conversation. So I think so that's a pitfall. Because these defaults change, if we're not conscious about that, then we kind of act the same way. I have a message in my head, I'm just going to tell that, and then that's fine. Not exactly. So, we have to think about how much is actually communicated. And, well, one part of how much is communicated is the amount of text that I wrote. But that's not the important part of what's communicated. The important part of what's communicated is what's left in his memory afterwards. Because I can say lots of words, and if the other person isn't listening, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever. And there are no nonverbal cues with what I did in chat. There's no tone of voice. So we try to do this. We try to put emojis in there, and yeah, they're fun, but I mean, really, it's nowhere near the actual face expressions and tone of voice. And I'm waving with my arms as I'm talking to you here. I'm making eye contact with different people in here, and I'm looking at the background so you all think that I'm making eye contact with you, and all those kinds of tricks that we do all the time, and somebody's nodding their head, and I feel good about that. That's all gone in text. So text is pretty lo-fi, low fidelity kind of communication, really, but it becomes the default quite easily when we do remote work. And async means that we have slow feedback, and as I said, our minds are really not hardwired to be very good at slow feedback. Like, I guess an example is that most people can learn to juggle at least 3 balls, and it doesn't take that long. And the reason for that is that there's really, really fast feedback. You drop a ball, you know that you did it wrong. You do that kind of thing. If you have like weekly feedback cycles, something you did a week ago and then you get feedback, your mind won't pick up on that. You will only pick up on that if you actually do something in order to make it present again. That's why retrospectives also are hard to do well and are effective when they're done really well, because it takes real effort to get us into that mindset again. So there really is that kind of difference. So those few hours between what I wrote and the feedback that I got, that makes a difference. Okay, so the second story that I want to get into here is the case of the build servers. So we, as everybody else, we want to do continuous everything, and we want to automate, and we want to continuous integration and deployment and delivery, yay! And we already had some of that set up. So we had this machine that you could pour some bits into, and out comes Docker containers, because, well, Docker containers, we all have to do it right. But there's more to it than that. Again, there's more to it. So again, scribbling on my little sticky notes, sort of different things. So, I also want to build those pull requests. Remember, that was one of the things that I wanted to introduce into the way of working, using pull requests. I want to run the unit test. I don't only want to actually build. I want to run our tests and integration tests, and I'm probably going to come up with more levels of tests that I want to run. I want to deploy to not only the dev environment, but the other environments that we have, and I want to control that. I expect my requirements for this automation to change over time. And especially for this last reason, I want self-service around that. Self-service meaning that I want myself and the other developers on the team to be able to go in and change these builds, because it's our day-to-day work tool. something that we use all the time. If it breaks, we need to be able to fix it. If we want it to work differently, we need to be able to fix it. If we want to speed it up, we need to be able to fix it. So we need self-service around that. We need to be able to do things ourselves. So at this point, I was looking at, there is a team of IT people here. But then I kind of figured out that, well, there's a team and then there's some sub-teams within this. Somewhat informally formed sub-teams, and that's kind of fine. We do that, right? We self-organize. That's a good thing. But there was two distinct groups at play here, which I don't agree with doing like that. There was a group of people who had built the machine that made the builds, and there was a group of people who used the machines that did the build. So there were the developers writing the code that went into the build machine, and then there were the people that maintained that machine. So that doesn't really fit with the idea of self-service, because then it's a black box for these people. But I want them to be able to fix it when it breaks. So that's different. So being textual, I did the same thing. I wrote, again, my reasons why I wanted this, and then I got the same thing back. Great, here's somebody who's also textual, so I'm not making the same mistake again. We are communicating via text, so I'm making a different mistake, I can already tell you that. But it's not the same mistake. So this goes back and forth, and there's a lively dialogue, so I'm not just getting the okay back. I'm getting like lots of recent responses back here, and that's good, but I'm not really getting the message through. It's quite clear to me that I'm not really getting the message through. So I kind of reached this point where now this is me. I want to set up my own builds, god damn it. And well, I don't think she's that easy to talk to at that point, and I don't think I was that easy to talk to at that point. And sort of when you push like that, the push comes back. So I sort of heard this, that this is never going to production. At the point in time where we're at there, I set up a different build tool and created builds, and they ran the unit test. They did pull request builds, and they deployed to our dev environment, and I was just like, hey, okay, this is great, and I had shown it to the other developers, and they were able to self-service. I could see no problem with this. But it's fine that you're using this against dev. It's never going to production. What? Why? So, okay, that was kind of a full stop. Now we have to figure out what something is wrong here. And turns out that I was focusing on the wrong thing. Because what I was focusing on was the fact that we sort of had these two different groups, and I wanted the self-service. So I thought the pushback was based on somebody losing control over those builds. I thought that what I needed to convince somebody else about was that A, this leaves you more time to do more important and more valuable work because you have more than enough on your plate. B, this is more efficient for the company. I thought that was the argument that I was having. Turns out it wasn't. The thing that I didn't realize was the problem with what I'd set up was that I was using a SaaS product and on one cloud, and we were on another cloud. And because of reasons for consolidation around monitoring these things and being certain of the security posture around everything, they wanted it to be in the same cloud. That was the actual problem, and that was why it wasn't ever going to go to production. They didn't want it reaching from one cloud to the other cloud. I didn't see that at all. And that's actually a good reason. It's just I was just so focused on something else. And why was that? Because I had preconceptions. Because I, from past experience, from other engagements with clients, saw the situation that there's one subgroup and there's another subgroup. So the pushback here is going to be around power between those subgroups. But it wasn't. So we had that text communication going on there, and all the while I was reading stuff into it that wasn't actually in the text, but I expected it to be there. So again, because it's such a lo-fi medium of communication, really beware of these preconceptions. You so easily read it into everything, and I definitely did here. And the solution really, this could have been resolved if I hadn't done that. So in a perfect world, we won't have preconceptions. I don't really believe in that. We can be aware that we'll have them, and then we can try to put them aside. And the other thing I think we can do is, when it feels like this communication is beginning to be a little bit weird, because I'm arguing this and you're answering something that isn't quite really answering my question, and have a call instead. So change the medium of communication to something with a little more fidelity, and then maybe you figure out that, oh, we're talking about two different things. So the time zones also played into this. There's 9 hours time difference in this case between me and the people I was talking to. So again, there's definitely a thing that there's no overlap, and that means that most of the message, that there's a time span between sending the message and getting the reply. So you can sort of, which also means that then you can go think about things. That makes the preconceptions even worse. I sent this message and I'm expecting an answer coming from a certain place. Now I have hours to go confirm to myself that that's probably what's going to come back. And then at that point, I'm almost certain to read my preconceptions into what they are writing, if I'm not aware that I have these preconceptions. So very async, or somebody has to work outside of normal office hours. And with this kind of time difference, yeah, sure, I worked some nights as well, but there's a work-life balance to be had there. I couldn't work every night for more than a year. I would burn out. That wouldn't work. But some nights, and so make the most of those as well is really a lesson learned here, that I should have focused more on the fact that this communication wasn't going the way that it was supposed to. So I should have said that's my number one priority when I'm online, while he also is. Whereas I was probably focusing more on, I want to do some pair programming, and maybe doing the easy things, at least from a communication standpoint, calling up the people that I knew that I found it easy to talk to, and then we do something technical. Yeah, because we like code, and then we get along, and it's good. But I should have resolved the communication problems in the overlap that was created by me working evenings. So that's also a lesson learned. Focus on actually resolving those communication problems when you have that overlap. Again, remember that it's lo-fi to use text. You can easily go past each other because it's async and it's chat by default, and the fidelity is low. Okay, so it's kind of another angle on the same thing, kind of a different angle on the same thing, that text isn't as good as somebody like me tends to think. So here's a different kind of story, really. This one has a different set of lessons learned. It's the case of the many services. So along the way, we planned some sub-projects, and we planned some stuff out, and we wanted to set up a bunch of services, A, B, C, D, E, blah, blah, blah. More than that, it's not important. It's not the structure, it's just something. And again, found myself sort of thinking it through, what do we need to do? Looking at this piece of functionality that we want to deliver. Looks like around 10 services, and I had some ideas of what they were going to be, but wasn't completely sure. We can't design everything up front, right? We don't get it completely right. Then there's some practicalities. We need to set up Git repositories for each of these services, set up the pipelines for each of those. We have to get databases for it, and then we should probably prove the design out by creating a tracer bullet. So just to make sure that we understand that term. So a tracer bullet is an XP, extreme programming term, and the idea is really to make a really, really thin version of something, not even an MVP, much thinner than that, just something that goes end to end. So it'd be something that sort of go through these about 10 services, because that gives you an idea of, does this look like something that could ever work, or am I just way off? So that's probably a good idea to do before we do too much else. So I'm kind of jotting this down, and we're talking about this as well, and we're talking in the team of developers that are going to create this. But again, it's a people problem, or it's a people issue, which I'll return to. So something that also changes between being in an office and being at home is your situation, right? In both situations, we want to be productive. That's why we get paid, and it's also more fun to actually be productive than not. But there's a different feel to being productive. When working from home, we're sitting by ourselves behind our little screens, and it doesn't have to be dark, but can. Well, whatever you like. So you're sitting there with all the code on the screen, and you can feel really productive. You can be really productive. That's one of the good things about this remote thing. You don't get interrupted necessarily. So you're there, you're coding away, and I'm delivering stuff, and I'm being productive. That's good. Okay. So we'll just remember that for a little bit. And then something else to notice about this team, and I guess about every team, is that knowledge isn't evenly distributed. So this person knows something this person doesn't, who knows something this person doesn't, who knows something that this person doesn't, right? That's natural. We have different skills, and that's kind of also the point of being a team, right? That we work together, and we make each other better with the different sets of knowledge that we have. Now, that plays into this picture again, because in this specific situation, we'd set up these different things that I had jotted down. We'd set up that as Jira tasks, and so we had a Kanban board, and now we're really working together because we have Jira, right? And but that does outline things that needed to be done. So somebody's sitting down at home, at the home office, and looks at those Jira tasks and say, okay, I want to close some tasks today because then I'm productive, which is true. So person goes ahead, creates Git repositories, creates services based on a template that we'd set up because we wanted some similarities between our services, work with the DBAs to create the databases in the different environments that we needed, and really was closing a lot of Jira tasks. And we can make fun of Jira all day long, but it did actually outline a lot of the work that we needed to get done. So closing these, yeah, that's a good thing. But just like knowledge isn't evenly distributed, then these tasks aren't quite equal either. So a couple of things happened as a result of this. One being that the person wasn't that much into how our build pipelines and deploy pipelines were set up. So we went ahead and created the Git repositories and the build and the services, but not the builds. So that's kind of leftover work. Somebody else has to come in and either pick that up or teach them to do it, and both of those are kind of fine, but there's a little bit of a but in a couple of slides. And the other thing is that this tracer bullet stupidly is at the bottom of the list. It should have been at the top of the list because that's not probably the most important thing. That we actually prove out our plans for how we are going to build this. Because if the plan is wrong, then there can be a lot of wasted work in this. And that's the point of this story, really, that productivity comes in at least two forms. One is the personal productivity. So sitting there behind the computer, really getting stuff done, creating those services, making them a lot of them. But then there's the whole team's productivity, which is very much affected by now we have 10 services without a build and deploy pipeline. So nobody, and that wasn't acceptable for the team. We wanted everything to go into those pipelines. And that was something I hammered a lot, partly because of the change agent thing. I wanted to change the way they were working, so I couldn't accept that we stepped outside of those boundaries. So now we have 10 services without the builds. That means that now the most important thing is to set up those builds. Now the most important thing is that, but really the most important thing was that traceability. But so now somebody else on the team has to do that task because we can't have that code just rotting away. So there's a difference between being productive on your own and being productive in a team. If you're just creating work for somebody else that really should rather have been redirected at some other work, then it's not productive overall, but it feels productive. And that makes this is some place where there's a big difference between being at home and being in an office, because while you're sitting there, you know that there's a team, yes, but they're not present, so you don't actually see them. It's not visceral. But the individual productivity while sitting there behind the screen is very visual. And if you stop, the room is just quiet, and I don't really know how to go on now, and I'm alone. So what do? I pick up something else that I can do. That's easy to do. I think that's something to be even more aware of when you're working from home, because it's so easy to forget the rest of the team. And that's some of what happened here. And that happened in two ways. One was the one that I've been talking about, that the individual productivity is very visible, whereas the team productivity is less visible. So we got trapped into that. The other way to turn that is that also happens for the rest of the team. So the knowledge isn't evenly distributed. So just as it's for the person who gets stuck and can't set up the builds, they need to reach out and learn how to do that now instead of creating more of that work that are pushing in front of them. But it goes the other way as well, that we're not in the same room. Nobody can see that I'm jotting something down on my little paper, and I can't see what that other person is doing all day long. So if I know in my head that we need to do that tracer bullet first, really, I can't assume that that's just knowledge. I may have to make that even more explicit than we probably would have in a normal team, because in a team where we were in the same office, because at least in that situation, I would probably see that, oh, you're doing this all day. We probably have to stop this. But with the time zones and with the working from home, it takes longer before you see that if you're not conscious about reaching out. So working from home, we need to reach out a lot. We need to insist on some responsibility sort of end to end, because just because we can't see each other, we still have to build it and own it and run it in production. All those things that we say to each other, they are still true. It just becomes a little bit more invisible because we're sitting there behind our own screen, which ties into sort of, well, one of the things that I also like to bang on about is that this idea of getting into the zone, I think, can sometimes be a bit dangerous because it focuses very much on the individual productivity, and that can be at the expense of the team productivity. And that happened here. Yeah, and one thing again that I think and that's really a failing on my part in this story, is that we failed to exploit the time overlap. There was a time overlap in this case, but I sort of accepted the whole, now I'm not going to disturb because you're really productive right now. I should have insistence. Let's have a call. Let's pair program on this. Let's spend the time that we can actually be together. Then it would have been much more obvious that, oh, we're not exactly doing this according to plan. So let's adjust before we get too far down that road. Okay, so I think that we'll skip this slide, and then we'll do a last quick story, which is the case of the slow query. And I'll go through this a little bit quickly. So we had we had a service that kept repeatedly crashing. This counts containers crashing. crashing, and it seems like we almost solved the problem here, and then I think we actually solved it here. But it was bad at this point, at least. Crashing. This wasn't in production. We saw it before that. So myself and another developer, we set up some time to pair program on this. And remote pairing, I think, actually works really, really well. Again, it's not quite the same fidelity as being face-to-face and pairing in the same office, but it works really, really well. It's great to share screen and do pair programming. So we were humming along, and that was good. But we ended up getting stumped, the two of us. We couldn't figure it out. We were focusing on one technical problem, and we were convinced that this was where the problem was. So, luckily, and it is kind of luckily, we chose to share that in a group chat where there was a bunch of other people, and knowledge isn't evenly distributed. So, luckily, somebody else on the team was able to point out that you're looking at the wrong problem. The problem is over here, and boom, much better. And we could move past that. So that's something to be aware of as well. Is it open room communication or closed room communication? So I would say avoid DMs. Do calls, yes. But remember, that's kind of like getting up in the office, going into a small meeting room, just the two of you, and having a secret conversation. It's a little bit like that. Nobody else is involved. Nobody even knows it's going on there. So it becomes very closed. So use those team chats. I don't think you should think about it like disturbing a whole big room of people just because you say something in a larger channel. It's sharing. People can just close down their Slack and open it when they actually want to read it. In this case, that did help us. So beware of using DMs too much. Remember that that's a closed way of doing it. I also put face-to-face time as needed as one of the lessons learned here, because, and that really has to do with the fact that the pair programming session we had was really, really good. But I think part of that is because we did have some face-to-face time. I'd been to the States and met these people and just sort of figured out that we had some common interests. That kind of thing, humanizing, really helps as well. So, in summary, beware of communication styles. Be open in the communication. Cut down on the direct messages. Don't be afraid to disturb in the broader rooms. That brings in more people. Remote pairing is awesome. Do it a lot. It works really well with screen sharing. You can get a lot of stuff done like that. The zone can kind of be a trap, especially when you're alone, because it feels so productive, but it might hinder the team in being productive collectively. Time zones are hard. Who would have known? Yeah, it's not that big of a surprise, but naively, I didn't see it as a big of a problem as it turned out to be. Remote amplifies communication problems, so maybe not all problems, but communication problems definitely does, because you don't have all the normal cues. So, and it's much easier to dehumanize somebody who's just an avatar than somebody that you're actually talking to and eating lunch with and stuff like that. So remember that. Face-to-face time is still needed. I think the effects of it wear off somewhat quickly. So I think it's a good idea to travel a little bit, not every week, maybe not every month, but at least every quarter. Go see each other. I think that helps. But it is real great, and it is still great for all of these reasons. It's extremely flexible. I've seen my friends and family a whole lot. I'm in better shape than I was before that because I've been running more. The coffee is good. There's no fluff. There's no dress code. There's all these things. All these things are true. That makes for happier people, and happier people make good products. So yeah, all these things are true. Just remember the communication as well. So thank you. You can contact me here, and I'll stick around, and maybe there's some questions on Slido. I'll look at that. So, but thanks for listening, and we're just about out of time.